Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to introduce Bob Robinson, a philosopher whose extraordinary journey has taken him well beyond traditional Stoicism and academic boundaries. With a PhD from Purdue University, Bob transformed an academic background into a profound exploration of human potential by teaching philosophy inside the penitentiary of New Mexico. For 6 years, he pioneered philosophical education at both men's and women's prisons, developing innovative approaches to ethics, stoicism, and practical wisdom. Currently teaching in the Honors College, Bob's groundbreaking course, Prison and the Good Life, bridges philosophy, psychology, and correctional studies, offering students unique insights into human decision making and resilience. Drawing from his direct experiences with incarcerated individuals and his expertise in Stoic philosophy, he provides compelling perspectives on personal growth, ethical choices, and the complex dynamics of prison culture. As if his intellectual pursuits weren't diverse enough, Bob also brings physical discipline to his repertoire, occasionally teaching Muay Thai and embodying the holistic approach to understanding human experience that defines his work. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Bob Robinson.
Thanks, Phil. That was a very nice introduction. So I'm excited to and honored to speak to all of you today. I want to give a quick shout out to Phil for organizing the event and inviting me. It was an unexpected invite and a fortuitous event for me. So Phil, I appreciate you. And I should be honest that in talking this through with Phil, some of what I have to say today did definitely benefited from his input. So yeah, thank you, Phil.
Thank you.
So my credentials to talk today really have, I think, less to do with my training as a professional philosopher and more to do with the fact that I stumbled into teaching Stoicism in prisons after leaving professional philosophy, where I didn't study Stoicism at all. So my understanding of Stoicism is very much informed by my engagements with prisoners. I didn't teach Stoicism because I believed it. I came to believe it as a result of witnessing challenging human beings, including myself, grow as they grappled with applying the principles. So today is less about teaching Stoicism in prisons than Stoic lessons from prison. The culture of prison applies pressure to anyone who might try to be virtuous, mostly to prisoners, but sometimes to staff too. Prison raises the stakes on any decision. Thankfully, the stakes of our lives aren't that high, but paradoxically, a consequence of that is we also miss out on opportunities for insight and character growth. I don't advocate going to prison to find those things, but if I do my job right today, hopefully it's not necessary. So I have two primary lessons today that I want to cover. The first, learn to respect ignorance, and I'm going to jump right into that. I'm attracted to the Stoic account of evil as stemming from ignorance. It makes sense to me given how many conversations I've had with people about the bad things they've done. I've known few inmates to deny their crimes and many who wish to justify them. And to me, that's really fascinating. Why such an effort to justify the bad things that they've done? Part of the answer, I think, is due to our social nature. When we're negatively evaluated, we feel an impulse to defend our goodness to others to maintain our social status, or what's left of it. I'll talk more about our social status in the next lesson. But part of the reason we justify those things is that we actually believe we haven't done bad. So in Meno, Socrates says, obviously those who are ignorant of the evil do not desire it, but only what they suppose to be good, though it is really evil. So that those who are ignorant of it and think it good are really desiring the good. And the basic point there, right, is we get confused about what's good, falsely believing good things to be bad and bad things to be good. That's what ignorance does to us. But what exactly is the mechanism there? In letter 50, Seneca says, why do we deceive ourselves? The evil that afflicts us is not external, it is within us, situated in our very vitals. For that reason, we attain soundness with all the more difficulty, because we do not know that we are diseased. I really like this description because it allows us to frame ignorance as a feature of our minds rather than a bug. I stumbled onto that connection reading Thinking Fast and Slow by psychologist Daniel Kahneman, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And there he articulates the dual process theory of mind. And that theory allowed me to create a mental framework for understanding how I could approach working with inmates to pull them into conversations that might help them along. Whether the framework is true or accurate, I don't know. I'm not a professional psychologist, but I do know that the framework really helped me understand how I could better work with the incarcerated population. So the dual process theory proposes that the mind is composed of two systems. System one is automatic, quick, and involuntary, while system two is slow, deliberate, and voluntary. Loosely adapting these ideas to Stoic terminology, we can say that system one is passion, desire, and emotion, while system two is reason. System one is forceful, producing within us impulses to actions, and system two must exert effort to restrain the force of system one. And to do so well, it must be trained. The forcefulness of system one was once required for surviving the risky, insecure environments of natural selection. Most of us no longer exist in such environments, so while we're subject to its forcefulness, some of the force is lost due to the changes in our natural conditions. However, if such conditions might arise in the modern world, like in a prison, suddenly there is more forcefulness. Where there is greater perceived risk and insecurity, system one is more demanding than system two, and it must exert a lot of effort to combat system one. If reason is the tool by which we guide ourselves to the good, then it fails when it is overrun by passion, desire, and emotion. For reason to be overrun is, in my framework, for system two to fail to ask the right questions about what is good. So the question being this: will this choice benefit me? In my conversations with inmates, I'm struck by admissions of not thinking much about the question at all. Most of us seem to ask it automatically, just by virtue of our parenting and social groups. But not them. Most of them exist in social conditions in which respect, money, power, and pleasure are the goals, and manipulation and violence are just viable tools for obtaining those things, and actually effective to some degree. Their behaviors have been rewarded either externally from others or internally based on what they think matters. And they haven't had much of a reason to ask or question it. So bad behavior makes sense to us because the behavior is a solution to the problem of getting the things we desire. When system two doesn't have the resources to question system one, to frame questions that show us our behavior is actually self-destructive, system two is hijacked. This is a bad state of affairs, but it isn't an unnatural state either. It's baked into our nature. The ease in which system one can compel system two into its service is why the Stoics take ignorance so seriously. If ignorance is a feature and not a bug of our minds, it's really so much worse than we think. It's not just that we don't know what is good, we're always in peril of not knowing and then doing bad. This is why Epictetus announces in Discourses 2:11, "What is the beginning of philosophy?" he asks. The beginning of philosophy with those who take it up as they should and enter, as it were, by the gate, is a consciousness of man's own weakness and impotence with reference to things of real consequence in life. This is a consciousness more in the way of attentiveness than one-time awareness. We are always at risk of system one corrupting system two. When we admit the truly wretched state we're in, we allow our reason to gain an advantage. Our brains are sensitive to patterns and causalities, as those things enable success, efficiency, and avoidance of harm. This is one way that system one mobilizes system two to further those passions, desires, and emotions. However, if the solutions system two proposes are too complex or require too much effort, system one simply won't listen. Solutions need to be simple, efficient, and clearly beneficial. System two needs to speak the language of system one. In my experience, it's not all that useful to go head to head against inmates regarding their justifications. When I have, they've checked me. I would get statements like, "No disrespect, Dr. Bob, but you haven't lived the life that we've lived." And I think they're right. I haven't, so they're not wrong. And I don't really have much room to argue with him. Like, what business do I have? The solution is to teach them to ask the right questions. So something like this: you say that living that way was great. I can't say otherwise. I haven't done it. But look around. Look at the prison walls. How good is it now? Prison walls are obvious signs that the strategies aren't working well because no one wants to be there. This is, I think, leading someone to enter through the gate. And it seems to work a lot of the time. Well, why? We all probably love the introduction to Handbook. Sometimes I wonder if Epictetus isn't up to something we miss. I would open my classes asking inmates what they think makes life worth living. Their answers, like our honest answers, are mostly things in the not up to us column. I think Epictetus wants us to notice how almost everything we really and truly care about is not up to us. Things might go well for us, sure, but eventually he implies you will learn now or the hard way um, that they're not up to us. You will now or later smash your head against the wall. The consequences, your enemies, all these officers, society, the system, whatever you want, just to ask yourself this question: how's it going for you? If the answer is not well, then maybe you're focused on what isn't up to you. What's left though? We know the Stoic answer: who you choose to be. That's it. And for a guy that's locked up, for those, and probably for some of us who aren't, that's a new way of thinking. So Stoicism can work in a correctional setting because it's impressively unimpressive. Our brains are built to extend out beyond their capacities, reaching for things they cannot deliver. Those things are bound to disappoint us in some way or another. We want people to respect us, but some won't. We want money, but we have to fight for it. We want power, but people will be after us. We want pleasure, but the come down is rough. Is it true that so much of what we want isn't up to us? And maybe that's why things don't work out the way we want. That's a simple question. It's system 2 speaking the language of system 1. Once the question is clear, it just needs to be asked repetitively. Like any muscle, reason can build strength. It just needs to ask the right questions consistently with regular repetitions and against resistance to grow. Fortunately for us, system 1 always provides resistance. As Marcus says in Meditations 520, quite famously, and we all know this, the mind adapts and converts to its own purpose the obstacle to our acting. Maybe we don't want to overcome ignorance. Maybe we should instead look to adapt it and convert its inherent power to our purposes. I knew an inmate was ready for change when they would tell me they felt like they were smashing their heads against the wall, that they were just getting nowhere with their decisions. It was their way of saying that they think things just aren't really going well and they don't know what to do about it. And I would be honest with them. I'd say, yeah, I've felt that way too. And you want to know why it feels that way? I think it's because we just want things that aren't up to us. Adapt that energy to what is up to you, and maybe things will go better. My favorite response when we would have those conversations was just simply, I've never thought of it like that. And to me, that was, hey, welcome to the gate of philosophy. So that's the first lesson. Learn to respect ignorance. Lesson 2, character really matters when the stakes are elevated, so raise the stakes. So what is up to us? Our character. That lesson hit me hard working in prisons. It came as a surprise to me how my integrity seemed to be at play in teaching philosophy in prisons. Early on, I made a mistake by not confronting a group about some inappropriate jokes and took the matter to the unit manager instead. The UM and I addressed it together, but the group was disappointed with me. They said, you just didn't need to involve the UNM. Why not bring it to us directly? A student asked. I said, honestly, I was just scared at how you guys react because you guys can be pretty scary. And their response was just as honest, maybe, but now we don't trust you. The rest of the class got really clunky and awkward, and they basically refused to attend the next session. My classes weren't mandatory, so they could refuse. And the class died, which was sad because at that point it had been a very good class with like really great conversation. But the lesson I learned is that my cowardice to address them and feeling like I needed to bring in others really undermined their trust in me. And it was a really brutal lesson for me. Well, what I learned there is, right, moral talk is cheap. I can stand in front of a group discussing the virtue of courage and yet fail to exemplify it. How could I expect them to be wise if I can't be wise myself? It's human nature to look for hypocrisy. It's a telltale sign of untrustworthiness. In our ancestral past, when the conditions of life were much more insecure, integrity was a sign of someone who was willing to make sacrifices for others, and hypocrisy a sign of someone willing to make sacrifices of others. And you don't share risk with someone who has this stink of hypocrisy. So prisons are a very insecure social environment. We are social creatures built to form relationships with others in order to navigate life. But many inmates are opportunists, so they tend to be very cynical about the motivations of others, either because they are themselves opportunists and project it onto others, or they've just seen so much of it. As a general rule of self-preservation, always look for the potential concealed hidden motivation. Assume people are up to no good. Of course, no one who's up to no good presents that way. No, they present as good, caring, and kind, and only later does it turn out otherwise. So, just as a rule, don't trust anyone. Relationships with staff and officers are also precarious. Most staff and officers are decent professional people, but given their access to outside resources, they can be targeted for manipulation. And when that happens and they fail, it doesn't help inmate cynicism. What is worse, though, is when staff get morally preachy. Now you're just bringing attention to yourself. Some prisoners might test people just because they have nothing better to do and someone's kind of asking for it if they do that. When you feel like you're at the bottom of the ladder of social status, it feels good when others slip down to join you. So relationships in prison with other human beings are just fundamentally insecure. It took a mistake for me to learn maintaining my integrity then was actually built into the job. It wasn't up to me that they cared about my character. They wanted to know if I'm the person that I'm asking them to be. If I am, they may very well take the risk of opening their minds to me. And if not, they'd prefer to spend their times in their cells than spend it with a guy who doesn't have the mettle to honor his own principles. In a socially insecure environment, that guy, me, I was a risk. I was a hypocrite waiting to make a sacrifice of them in their minds. Of course, the formerly trained philosopher in me kind of wanted to dismiss all this. Who I am probably shouldn't really matter to who we should be. But I learned that logic is more of a concern for a college classroom than the harshness of prisons. Who we are does matter to others, whether we like it or not. Socrates maintained his integrity against the Athenians, while Aristotle wouldn't let them sin twice. We respect Aristotle, but we try to be Socrates, despite the fact that Aristotle is probably the better ethicist. And I don't think that's an accident. Whenever I told the story of Socrates, of someone who wouldn't sacrifice his integrity to the death, my students thought it was great because integrity matters a lot in their environment. Unfortunately, I had looked to my students more like Aristotle than Socrates. I lacked the courage of my conviction, and so the content of my convictions looked like what someone would believe if the stakes weren't very high. The guys I taught were willing to live and die for their codes, so why follow the lead of a guy too scared to stand for what he believes? Doesn't that mean he doesn't know if what he believes is actually true? Our integrity or lack thereof is out in front of us, probably doing more to influence the judgment of others than we think. Our actions count as evidence for and against the truth of our beliefs. And when conditions of insecurity increase and trust is low, when the pressure of good and right action has stakes, our character may be all that matters. There is something useful I learned about being forced to have that kind of skin in the game. There's a reason the most significant growth in my own character occurred while I was teaching in prisons. Teachers are familiar with the principle that the best way to learn something is to teach it. One reason that is the case is because the teacher has to learn something well enough to impart knowledge. But the motivation to do that may also be an inherent sign of social risk. Teach poorly, people don't learn, and that's on you. Generally, where we perceive risk, our brains activate the circuitry to learn and grow. There is social risk in teaching, and the risk facilitates the learning required to teach well. So we are social creatures. It's our nature that dictates our ultimate good as contributing to the well-being of humanity through the virtues. That's the Stoic end goal. But hitting that goal requires leveraging system one, that drive to be perceived well by one's social group. So yes, the opinion of others are not up to us, but it isn't like other people are not paying attention to us. They are, and that's natural. We shouldn't try to overcome it. We should instead adapt it to our moral purpose, just like a good teacher does. We should, in fact, invite these kinds of situations in which we're scrutinized, where other people are paying attention to who we are. I believe we shortchange our moral growth when we avoid reputational risk. When the inmates walked away from me that day, I really worried I'd gain a bad reputation. And in prisons, a bad reputation means you're smoked. Like you're not gonna be effective. Word's gonna get around fast. And so I really had to change quickly, and I had to force myself to learn how to confront things that bothered me, like the inappropriate jokes. And I had to learn how to do it really well. So later I would pull someone aside away from the others, sensitive to the insecurities of social status in prison, and say, hey, I like a good joke as much as the next person. But these kinds of jokes make it really difficult for me to do my job. I'll get people asking questions about what it is that we're doing in here. And believe me, they already have enough questions because what is a philosopher doing in prison? But I know you're not trying to make me look bad. So let's maybe try to avoid that with the jokes because it does make me look bad. So, side note, what I'm doing there, right, is I'm leveraging system one against itself, examining unintended harms of an unquestioned natural impulse. Now, most of us aren't in prisons where reputational risk is high. So, how do we create safe and acceptable risk for ourselves to facilitate learning? We might take some lessons from the Stoics. Just as we might build resilience by occasionally wearing uncomfortable clothes, sleeping on the floor, fasting, or pushing our physical limits in exercise, and that's just to name a few, we can volunteer to put ourselves in situations where the risk is felt, but not especially consequential. So one way I did that was I learned to announce my expectations to my students. I let them know that any expectation I had for them was a two-way street. So as I've described, the risk was already baked into the situation I was in, but I made it clear to them that I invited their attention if I failed. I wanted them to say something and I wanted them to call me out. Would I get it anyway? 100%. They would call me out anyway. But I wanted to own the risk up front, which made it feel more powerful to me because I knew I would need to own it. And that created reputational risk for me. And it really made me sharp. So I think we can do something similar with people in our lives. We can state our values to them and be transparent about who we want to be. And we should make them feel comfortable to say what they see. That's taking some reputational risk. You are inviting other people to measure your integrity and call you out. And it's a gut punch when you fail, right? And it's a gut punch because that's how we're built. It's supposed to be a gut punch. We care about our social standing and our relationships. We should leverage that to our learning advantage by appropriating it in how we communicate with others. And truthfully, I wouldn't have learned that lesson without my students in prisons forcing me to have that skin in the game. But why not find ways to voluntarily put that skin in the game to learn and grow? What's interesting to me too is how people respond to that. We like integrity. We want people in our lives that we can trust, and we trust people who take risks and come through. They don't need to do that for us. And when we trust people, we'll take risks with them because we believe they won't make a sacrifice of us. Instead, we see that they'll make sacrifices for us. And if you want to do your best for what is up to you, to lead someone to the gate of philosophy, get them to question what is up to them. And if you want to do your best, which is up to you, to lead them through the gate, show them that that you are someone that they can trust. Thank you for allowing me to provide those lessons to you today.
Thank you.